been waiting for has now finally arrived.
From knockouts to tap-outs.
It's all over!
Inside the octagon and beyond.
Is this not real now? Are we pretending?
We're rich, baby. Break out the red panties.
This is the MMA Report with John Pollock.
Unbelievable! Here we go!
Welcome to the MMA Report. I'm John Pollock. Thank you for joining us for another week. Coming up on today's show, we're going to be joined by a handful of guests, two of which will be in action this coming weekend. We've got Oli Thompson, Bellator heavyweight. He's drawing Cheick Kongo for Saturday night's Bellator 172 event from San Jose, California. We're going to chat about Bellator's heavyweight division, Oli Thompson being on this card, his lack of activity over the past year. After fighting 5 times in 2015, only getting one fight in last year, which was the bout against Matt Mitrione, who will be headlining Saturday's card against Fedor Emelianenko. We'll be spending some time on that Bellator card. And now UFC Middleweight, Johny Hendricks also will be on the program today. We're going to chat with him about his move up to middleweight. He is coming off a very tumultuous year in 2016 with losses to Stephen Thompson, Kelvin Gastelum, and then Neil Magny at the year-end show at UFC 207. He made the decision right after that loss to Magny that he's going to come up to 185 pounds, and he's meeting another fighter that was spending a lot of time at welterweight, came up to middleweight in his last fight, a return to the weight class for Hector Lombard. It's an interesting fight for a lot of reasons. I don't think that there is anyone on this card, including Travis Browne, that people have a microscope on more than Johny Hendricks. And we're going to chat with Johny about that, the pressure of this fight for himself, and if he is able to distance himself from the past year and focus on this one singular fight and not get wrapped up in the losing streak and the pressure that is on him. So looking forward to chatting with the former welterweight champion later on in the show. And MMA Junkie and USA Today's Mike Bohn will also be chatting with us. He is in Halifax, Nova Scotia. He had an opportunity to speak to many of the fighters that are competing on Sunday night, and we will welcome in Mike Bohn in just a couple of minutes. But first off, let's go back to UFC 208 on Saturday night. Certainly not a card that is going to be remembered in glowing terms, as the history book will show. We have a new UFC Women's Featherweight champion, as the title was awarded to Germaine de Randamie after going 5 rounds with Holly Holm, and most of the focus was on rounds, what I like to call rounds 2.5 and 3.5. What happened in between those rounds, as each round ended and Germaine de Randamie landed, in the case of the second round, at the conclusion of that round, landing 2 strikes, one of which was probably the most significant shot landed on Holly Holm the entire fight, and then less of an egregious act at the end of the third, but still a late shot coming in. And in both circumstances, referee Todd Anderson, who has taken a lot of heat for this, did not deduct any points, and it's put a big focus onto what the actual protocol is. We've heard referees such as John McCarthy and Rob Hines speak about this, since that the horn sounding is not the official end of the round. It is the official that does have to stand in and prompt the fighters that the round is over. I feel that is, if we are just to take that at face value, it takes a lot of the blame away from Germaine de Randamie and places onto the shoulders of Todd Anderson, and I think there's blame to go around here. Yes, Todd Anderson, this was his first UFC championship fight that he had officiated, but this is hardly a rookie referee. This is someone who has refereed lots of fights. You've seen him referee for Bellator, for World Series of Fighting. I mean, this is not an inexperienced referee. And on top of that, we've seen inexperienced referees in major league situations when the UFC goes to some states that they haven't often run, and you see local referees placed in these situations. I mean, we see this, more than I'd like to. And it's not as though it's some epidemic of strikes after the horn sounds. It's not as though that happens in such a regular occurrence that we can fully accept that a fighter, there's going to be situations where they do not hear the horn. I can buy that. I can buy a fighter being caught up in the moment, but at the same time, I wonder how much we need to necessarily be weighing intent versus a foul being committed. Did it happen or did it not? Because for Holly Holm, the intent does not matter. She got struck in the face significantly and then had to come back. And how she performed in rounds 3, 4, and 5 have no impact on how that situation should have been handled. It was a late shot, and Holly Holm was negatively impacted by that shot. And to me, that is grounds for a point to be removed. And because of the close nature of this fight, this would have been a draw had there been a point deduction. I'd also say that, some would say that, it could have been 2 points deducted, and maybe so. But I also feel if that first point was deducted, that isn't happening at the end of the third round. And then after the second instance, it was then that Todd Anderson gave a verbal warning to Germain that if this happened again, there would be a point deduction. So Holly Holm's camp is now filing an appeal to look at the actions of Todd Anderson. And interesting, they are focusing more on Todd Anderson than they are Germain de Randamie. And if Todd Anderson was either ill-equipped or just didn't act properly at the end of the rounds and properly signifying the end of the round to the fighters. I don't know if she has a case. It will go in front of the New York State Athletic Commission. Ultimately, I see the best case scenario for Holly Holm being that she does get the automatic rematch. That is going to depend on the status of Chris Cyborg Justino, which is obviously the fight people want to see. It's the reason that weight class is there. And this was hardly a successful card on pay-per-view. Dave Meltzer is reporting a very early estimate in the low 200s on pay-per-view, so hardly a commercial success, although they drew very well at the Barclays Center in Brooklyn, but very different from a live event versus a pay-per-view attraction. And you had the novelty of being in Brooklyn for the first time at a new arena, so that probably had something to do with it. And the rematch, I don't know how much demand there is for the rematch. It was close enough that from that side of things, you can justify a rematch. I just don't know what the public interest is in the rematch. I scored the fight 3-2 for de Randamie. I feel that fourth round, you can go either way. I think 3-2 for either woman is a justifiable scorecard. What was not justifiable were the scorecards read in favor of Anderson Silva and defeating Derek Brunson. Derek Cleary, Douglas Crosby, both scoring at 29-28 for Anderson Silva, and Eric Colon, 30-27. I feel all three scorecards are head-scratchers. I don't know how you score 1 and 3 for Anderson Silva when he absorbed the damage when he used his clinch and ate those uppercuts from Derek Brunson. This happened in the first and the third rounds. I thought the third was more solidified than the first round. The second round, I did rewatch that round. That was a very close round, and I can certainly see an argument for an Anderson Silva scorecard. On Saturday night, watching it for the first time, I had felt Brunson won all 3 rounds, and then rewatching the second, I think that's certainly a debatable round. So if you have 29-28 Derek Brunson, I think that's the lowest you can go in favor of Derek Brunson. I just did not see this for Anderson Silva at all. And it becomes a question of where you place Anderson Silva next, because you're coming off a fight that many believe that he had lost, and he's still an attraction. He's still somebody that you can put in the right middleweight fight, but I think it has to be the right person. And Derek Brunson was A, dangerous opponent, and B, not someone that I feel at this stage of Anderson Silva's career are the style of opponents, or maybe the name value of opponents, that you should be placing Anderson Silva with. I don't think he needs to be fighting the Yoel Romeros of the world in 2017. I think he should be involved in fights where it is 2 big names, one of which is Anderson Silva, that are going to be of most appeal to the broadest amount of people. We move on from UFC 208. It is a card that probably outside of the controversies won't be discussed too heavily. I will add that I thought that the 3-man booth of Jon Anik, Joe Rogan, and Daniel Cormier, as much as those 2 controversies may have negatively impacted people's opinion of the fights, it enhanced the broadcast. I thought in particular Joe Rogan and Daniel Cormier responding in real time to these controversies was excellent for the broadcast. I thought it was a very honest discussion of what was occurring and processing it as it was happening. This was not the case of sugarcoating or not going out on a limb. These two were very vocal, especially in the main event after that second and third round. So I thought the broadcast was a thumbs up on Saturday night with John Anik anchoring the team. Georges St-Pierre, it appears, is in the process of finalizing his deal to return to the UFC. Ariel Helwani reporting this week that the sides have verbally agreed to terms and the deal is imminent between the two, which would see Georges St-Pierre return after more than 3 years away from the sport after the fight with Johny Hendricks at UFC 167 in November of 2013. This is a year where when you look at Conor McGregor and all the different games he is playing, that you can't guarantee how many fights he is going to have. It certainly doesn't appear like it's going to be 3 fights as there were in 2016 for McGregor. Ronda Rousey looks to be done. That's not official, but I don't think there's anything to place faith in the idea of Ronda Rousey fighting this year. And then you have Brock Lesnar, which we'll get into as well. I think that's a pretty safe bet that he won't be fighting this year, if at all, again, for the UFC. So Georges St-Pierre ended up with a lot of leverage in a year where, as I just mentioned, UFC 208 not looking to be a very strong number. UFC 209 will be an interesting one. I certainly see it performing above 208, but not by a gigantic margin. I would say 300,000 buys would be kind of the ceiling for that card, as great of a fight card as that is. I mean, Khabib Nurmagomedov and Tony Ferguson is as entertaining a fight I can envision on paper as possible. And then you have the rematch with Tyron Woodley and Stephen Thompson. Mark Hunt is fighting Alistair Overeem. That's a very appealing card on paper, but that is going to be the biggest problem, is that having that ability on pay-per-view to do your big numbers, stars are in short supply. Fighters present on that UFC 209 card are not at that star level where you're talking 500,000 plus buys. We then move on to 210, where Cormier and Johnson, I think they'll be within that range, maybe a little above 300. Then we go to May, where it is Stipe Miocic and Junior Dos Santos. That, again, you know, you're looking at a lot of kind of 250 to 300,000 buy shows. And Georges St-Pierre is one needle mover that can make a big impact this year if he can fight even once. And certainly Michael Bisping is the fight that everyone is focused upon. The grander fight is Conor McGregor. That could be, and I feel safely would be, the most purchased UFC card in history if those two were to fight, either at 155 pounds that George has verbally stated he's open to, or at 170 pounds. And that is an interesting chip as well now that the UFC gets to play in these Conor McGregor negotiations, is that if they have Georges St-Pierre locked down, certainly the UFC wants to go in that direction. They would much rather promote a Conor McGregor-Georges St-Pierre fight than let the Conor McGregor-Floyd Mayweather Jr. circus continue to play itself out in the public, which is just getting silly at this point at all the information that is out there and the games being played publicly, that I think a lot of stock is being placed into a fight that is at best a theoretical at this point. One that people have their attention on, but how far along in the process, I think somewhat deceiving if you're going based on some of the reports that are out there. Brock Lesnar has announced his second retirement from mixed martial arts, the first in 2011, and now quietly this past week, it was reported by Mark Raimondi that Brock Lesnar had informed the UFC of his retirement and therefore removing himself from the USADA testing pool that he has been subject to ever since his return last July at UFC 200. And we don't have to go over all of the history, but he had the 2 failed tests for clomiphene, one that was taken prior to UFC 200, the results of which didn't come out until after the event and resulted in a 1-year suspension and $250,000 fine. So it's interesting. Brock Lesnar is certainly not going to talk about this. He's not going to talk, period. But Brock remained in this testing pool all of these months, and all he had was the inconvenience of being part of this USADA testing pool. And you have to somewhat speculate as to why. Why did he stay in this pool for all of these months? Did he have the idea of fighting again? Was that something he was battling within his own mind if he wanted to fight again and didn't want to remove himself, because that would be a signal that he wouldn't be fighting again? Now, he does have a deal with the WWE for just over another year. So first quarter of 2018, his contract will come due. And this story will resurface because that would be his last opportunity if he wants to ever fight again. The difference is with this retirement, the next time he wants to come back, he will have to go into a testing pool, which he was exempt from during his return last year. So that becomes interesting. I could see a scenario where maybe he believed he could fight again once his suspension was up this July, and I could not, in my wildest dreams, imagining the WWE, after what happened last July with the drug test failures, allowing their contracted performer to go out and do that again. I don't think they believe they received any positivity as a result of that, because the win over Mark Hunt was totally negated by the drug test failures. So for Brock Lesnar to go through this next year where he is subjected to testing when he knows he cannot fight while under contract to the WWE, why put yourself through that? So it will be interesting when his WWE deal comes due a year from now, because he will be 40 years old by that point, not at an age where I discount the idea of him fighting again if he chooses to. And at the very least, the UFC becomes leverage if he wants to renegotiate a strong deal with the WWE and sign maybe that one final contract with a promotional entity, whether it's WWE or the UFC. But Brock Lesnar, his shadow will always be cast upon mixed martial arts. It'll never fully be gone until he is completely done with professional wrestling and mixed martial arts. Quickly, let's run through some fights that were announced this past weekend, made official by the UFC. The biggest one, Jose Aldo, Max Holloway, June 3rd in Rio de Janeiro. That will headline UFC 212. That's going to be an awesome fight. Just, I can't wait for that fight. That is one to certainly circle on your calendar. Some other ones. Charles Oliveira, after missing weight 4 times at featherweight, he is returning to lightweight, and he'll fight Will Brooks in Buffalo at UFC 210. He fought a lot of tough guys in his last number of fights. He's lost 3 of his last 4 at 145, but those were to Max Holloway, Anthony Pettis, and Ricardo Lamas, and had a win over Miles Jury in that 4-fight stretch. At lightweight, he certainly is a fighter that has all of this raw talent, and the weight was a killer for him. So much like Johny Hendricks this coming weekend, maybe alleviating some of that stress of the weight cut is going to result in a better performance from Charles Oliveira. He will be tested against the former Bellator champion. Michelle Waterson, Rose Namajunas, that's going down April 15th on Fox. So yet again, Fox going with a women's match in the main event after really solid numbers last July with Holly Holm and Valentina Shevchenko, and then with Michelle Waterson and Paige Van Zandt last December. Though that same success was not seen by Valentina Shevchenko and Juliana Pena in January, but I feel this one should do very well on Fox. Cub Swanson is going to be returning on April the 22nd in Nashville, Tennessee for a Fight Night card in the main event against Artem Lobov. This was a puzzling one. Cub Swanson is coming off one of the best fights you have ever seen in the UFC. It was my fight of the year for 2016 against Doo-Ho Choi in Toronto at 206. And to me, Cub Swanson and Chan Sung Jung was a fight that sounded all kinds of great on paper. And instead, he's taking on Artem Lobov. And this, to me, is just, there is nothing to gain in this fight from Cub Swanson. For Artem Lobov, this is a great opportunity. You beat Cub Swanson. That's a career changer in the featherweight division. But for Cub Swanson, what a bizarre fight to be making for him coming off that incredible fight back in December. So those are some of your news and notes from the week. When we come back, we're going to check in with Mike Bohn. He is in Halifax. He will be giving us any updates from Halifax, some of the fighters he has spoken to, and we'll look ahead to Sunday's card and talk about some of the news. Plus, Johny Hendricks is on the show, Oli Thompson, and lots more coming up on today's edition of the MMA Report. We're back here on the MMA Report, and as promised, the big guest of this week's show from USA Today, an MMA junkie covering many sports abroad, not simply leaving his exclusivity to mixed martial arts. He is Mike Bohn, reporting live from Halifax, Nova Scotia. Mike Bohn is with us. Mike, how about that for an introduction?
Oh, that was perfect. Thank you, John. You are the king of introductions, and you nailed it there.
I try my best. How's Halifax? Is it freezing?
Oh my God.
Is it cold?
It's not that cold, but it is snowing like crazy. I think we just happened to get in like right yesterday, right in the lull of when it was not snowing, but pretty much right when I got in, about after 2 or 3 hours, it started coming down and it has not stopped. So I walked by some snowbanks that were taller than me. So you always know that's an unwelcome sign.
I always like events, even here in Toronto back in December, or when they go to Montreal or somewhere like Halifax, and some of the fighters that arrive with no knowledge of what the climate is like in this foreign land they are going to in Canada.
Yeah, that's definitely the case for some of them. I mean, I was talking to Travis Browne, actually, and he has already been here. He was actually the guest fighter the last time the UFC came to Halifax. So I think
That's right, he was.
Yeah, so I think he's a little more familiar with the turf, although that was in October, so I don't think the snow had quite hit as hard. But yeah, it's interesting seeing some of these people who had never, you actually see some of the Brazilians, I think like Thiago Moreta, some of those guys who are fighting, they had never seen snow before they came here. So a new experience for those guys.
So let's start with Travis Browne, because I think it's him and Johny Hendricks that are under microscopes this Sunday for this card. And a win or a loss, very different trajectories for either individual after Sunday. You mentioned Travis Browne and October of 2014. That's months removed from the loss to Fabricio Verdum, the first fight, and then leaving Jackson's camp prior to the Brendan Schaub fight at the end of that year. And here we fast forward to 2017, and what an interesting situation this guy is in. In the case of both Travis Browne and Johny Hendricks, who I know you spoke to as well, are you looking at this, Mike, as must-wins for these two to stay relevant in the heavyweight division for Browne, and for Hendricks, essentially after the year he had in 2016 in a similar spot now at a new weight class? Yeah,
that's absolutely the case. I mean, you talk to Travis, he doesn't really seem to have that sense of urgency. He feels, you look at that little skid he's on. He took the second Verdum fight, very short notice, lost that one. Then before that, he's fighting arguably the greatest heavyweight in MMA history in Cain Velasquez. So no shame in losing to either of those guys. But yeah, I think of course, you want the win, but you talk to him, he doesn't really seem to feel like he has a ton of pressure on his shoulders going into this one.
Now, we've got Johny Hendricks coming up on the show a little later on. You scooped us. You spoke to him before. And I guess the big item coming out of your chat with him was that he's currently sitting at 197 pounds, which has a lot of people concerned. But just predicting my interview with him, which may or may not have already been taped, I'm not getting the sense that he is too concerned about this and seems to be in pretty good spirits at this new weight, where the weight cut had become the biggest hurdle for him during his last number of fights.
Absolutely. He did not really seem concerned at all. For him, he was saying this is generally like around the same weight he would be at if he was to be dropping to welterweight. So he said he's not really doing too much different. He's just staying around the same weight. He didn't get 10 pounds heavier out of camp just because he had an extra 10 or 15 pounds of room between the welterweight and middleweight division. So for him, I think he is not really too concerned about it. He said that he wants to get down to, I think, about 3 pounds over the night prior to weigh-ins, which will be Saturday with it being a Sunday event. So for him, I think he's feeling very confident. He looked to be in good shape. He was high energy. He was not, being a little odd like we saw him at the media day ahead of the UFC 207 fight with Neil Magny. So he seems to be in a very good place. For him, it's a good matchup, I feel. Hector Lombard, of course, a former welterweight in his own who struggled badly to make that weight class and had, of course, been the Bellator champion at middleweight and all that stuff. So I think for him, he's just feeling very good. He said in the past, for the most part, he would do a 12-week training camp. The first 4 weeks would basically be, working on his skills, and then the final 8 weeks would be just focusing, obsessing about the weight cut and trying to get down to that 170 or 171 mark. So to push all that aside, he said he can actually go through a training camp, work on getting better as a fighter, developing his skills, which I think is, of course, what the main focus should be through a training camp. So for him, it seems like he's in a very good place going into this one. I'm very curious to see how it actually unfolds in the octagon. He said he felt like his punching power is back, just all the things that it seemed like he kind of lost over the past few years, over this rough stretch where he's lost 4 or 5. So for me, I'm very excited to see that one. He even admitted he's as curious to see as anyone how this is going to play out. And it seems like he's really backed off the retirement talk too. I know he said in some other interviews leading up to this fight that if he loses, he's going to retire. But talking to him, he said he feels like this isn't like an extension of the end of his career or the retirement talks. It's a rebirth. It's a new start. So it's all promising signs, promising things to hear from Johny Hendricks, an attitude that I haven't heard from him in quite a few fights.
Yeah, it's a weird comparison, but it's somewhat similar to Holly Holm in that it becomes a real obstacle when suddenly the losing streak becomes such a focus, and it's just getting that win and kind of having to distance yourself from your last performances and just focus on this one particular fight. And in Johny Hendricks' case, I mean, there's a ton of pressure, and it's kind of the ability to get rid of that pressure and just focus on the task. And that's much easier said than done for a lot of these athletes.
Yeah, and it was the exact same kind of talk from Hector Lombard when I spoke to him. He said that he was just killing himself making that 170 cut, and now he can actually feel healthy again. I mean, for Lombard, he was very made a huge mistake by just brutal TKO to Neil Magny last year, where he took a hell of a beating on route to the stoppage and then turned around less than 3 months later and took that fight with Dan Henderson back at middleweight. But he said, from the damage he took, all that, just turning around that quickly was a huge mistake, and that's why he's really taken some time off and come back for this fight. And he kind of has his back against the wall too. Hector Lombard hasn't officially won a fight in nearly 3 years. Of course, he had the result overturned due to the failed drug test with Josh Berkman, and then after that has lost his past 2 to Magny and to Henderson. So he, the focus is on Hendricks being in this drought, but Lombard is basically facing the same situation.
This is also a card where it's kind of a look at a number of Canadian prospects. I would say the biggest being Eamon Zahabi and Gavin Tucker making their UFC debuts. And it certainly does shine a light, Mike, on the difficulties for a lot of these Canadian fighters in just finding fights before they get signed by a major organization, where it's kind of a crapshoot in terms of what to expect from these fighters when they're not fighting all that regularly here in Canada, and there's giant gaps in between fights as well. That to me is an interesting storyline as well for Sunday.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I'm looking forward to the Tucker one. It kind of reminds me of the situation with Chris Kalades the last time they came to Halifax. You know, this local guy with a fairly impressive record who's maybe overdue in the UFC, coming in and getting that platform in front of his hometown crowd. And he has a pretty good matchup too in Sam Cecilia. Cecilia's been struggling a bit, but he's a guy who obviously is serviceable featherweight who's been in the UFC for quite a long time now. I think this is 12th or 13th fight with the order.
When it comes to the name of Georges St-Pierre, is there a lot of buzz around the fighters and just the event of itself with this news coming out this week?
Yeah, it seems to be. I actually just ran into Faraz Zahabi not long ago here in the hotel, and I asked him, is George back? And he, kind of gave a little bit of a smirk. He says not 100%, but it sounds like it's going in that direction. And yeah, I actually asked all the fighters that I had the chance to interview, who would you like to see GSP fight when he comes back? Are you excited? This and that. And they all seem to be, overwhelmingly thrilled by having his return. And it's actually funny. I asked them all who they'd like to see him fight, and including Johny Hendricks, 3 of them said they would like to see a Johny Hendricks rematch, which kind of took me off guard because, regardless of how close that first fight was, that probably wouldn't be in my top 15 of fights I'd like to see in a Georges St-Pierre comeback.
No, it's a drastically different landscape than it was in 2013. I mean, if you're looking at things, Mike, I mean, what does make the most sense for you right now, if all things are equal, of putting Georges St-Pierre in the most, intriguing fight possible for his return?
I think you gotta do Anderson Silva. It's been so long overdue. Anderson's coming off the win, whether you thought he actually won or not. That fight with Derek Brunson at UFC 208 still is coming off a victory. Or if you want to go the other direction, you could do Conor McGregor. I think that one would be pretty fascinating as well. I mean, if you were the UFC trying to kind of counter this whole Conor McGregor, Floyd Mayweather discussion, that's a pretty good option to put on the table. I could see a GSP Conor McGregor fight doing, upwards or close to 2 million, maybe a little less, but that would be a big seller on pay-per-view and something I think you could point to McGregor at as an alternative if he was to return to the octagon. I know that's going to upset a lot of featherweights, a lot of lightweights, all that stuff, but if we know that this version of the UFC, the WME, IMG era, they want to make the biggest fights with the biggest names. They'll sell the most pay-per-views, and you can't really go wrong with GSP versus Anderson Silva or GSP versus Conor McGregor. And if those aren't realistic, you could do maybe a Michael Bisping or something like that. It really depends, what George is looking for in terms of a title fight or just like a super fight. But I think you could do any of those three names would really intrigue me, and I think would be big events for the sport.
I know that MMA Junkie will have coverage all weekend long from Halifax, courtesy of one Mike Bohn, and you can catch all of the interviews he conducted. How many did you do today, Mike?
We did 8 today. So we had, of course, the top 4 on the card, and then a few others a little bit lower down. Sarah McMahon was actually really great. I think she's in a pretty fascinating spot right now with her being, among the top contenders at bantamweight. And then, of course, there's this featherweight option that's come up, and she gave a pretty interesting answer when I asked her about that. So maybe check that out.
That is what we call a hook from one Mike Bohn, a true professional. Thank you for joining us, Mike. Enjoy the card on Sunday. We'll definitely be watching from here, and we hope to see you soon.
Thanks, Sean.
All right, we're now going to move on, and we will welcome in Oli Thompson, who is competing this Saturday night, part of Bellator 172's main card. He will be taking on Cheick Kongo. Oli Thompson, a very engaging guy to speak with. He fought 5 times in 2015, only fought once in 2016. So we'll chat about kind of those extremes of activity over the last 2 years, and as well, the state of the Bellator heavyweight division. It's kind of been a difficult one to process over the last few years because of the inability of Vitaly Minakov to come and defend his championship for Bellator. He has since been stripped of that title, no longer with Bellator, and now that division, it's at least starting to find itself. You have this fight on Saturday, of course, the main event with Matt Mitrione and Fedor Emelianenko, and Quinton Jackson and King Mo Lawal. They'll be fighting at heavyweight come the end of March in Chicago. So you're getting now a semblance of a heavyweight division, some names attached to it, and moving forward, because a lot of these heavyweights over the last few years, your Bobby Lashley's, etc., were kind of in a holding pattern where they were just taking fights with no championship in mind. It was just kind of like hamsters running on a wheel and not progressing with this division. So here he is, Oli Thompson, joining us on the MMA Report. Coming up next Saturday night from San Jose, California at the SAP Center, it is Bellator 172, and in heavyweight action on the main card, Cheick Kongo will be taking on the man who joins us now, Oli Thompson. It's a pleasure to have you on the show, Oli. How are you doing today?
Doing very well, thanks. Pleasure to be here.
Tell me a bit about when this fight was presented to you. Was this kind of the kind of opponent you were looking for next? Cheick Kongo, obviously a very durable heavyweight. What was your reaction when this was proposed to you?
Yeah, well, obviously I was on the sidelines for a while. I was waiting for an opportunity from Bellator. It's been quite a long gap since my last fight, so I was just keen to get out and fight as soon as possible. I prefer to fight every sort of 2 or 3 months, so this has been long and drawn out. I was kind of I wasn't too sure in where Bellator would be would think I sit after the Mitrione fight. Obviously, I came into the Mitrione fight on a really good run, 5-0 the year before, just won a big title in Japan and beat some really incredible names. So when I got Mitrione fight, obviously I knew I was up against it. We got a guy coming out of a full camp, a guy riding high, a successful guy and dangerous, well-ranked in Mitrione, and I was taking the fight with sort of a couple of weeks training, so I knew that the odds were stacked against me before we even started, and I felt like I went out and made a really good account of myself. I gave him a lot of trouble, and if I'd had a full camp and was in my best condition, I personally feel I would have got the job done, but I didn't land the crucial shot that I needed to land. And as I slowed down, Mitrione just had an extra level there where he managed to sort of wear me down to the point where I sort of was able to continue. So I was hoping that the guys at Bellator still held me in the same high regard of me deserving big fights, but I also thought maybe they might give me a lower down fight, either a guy that's coming off a loss, or maybe someone that's sort of in the middle building up, maybe like a Lashley or someone like this. And when the call came in, I was surprised to hear that they were giving me one of their top guys, a guy who's on a good run, a guy whose record in Bellator is very good, talking about Cheick obviously, and a guy who's very well known. So although I was surprised, I wasn't disappointed, because it tells me that they held me in high regard, and I didn't lose any credibility from the Mitrione fight, which I didn't think I did. And in actual fact, I was being given a fight that had high stakes, and the rewards can be very high, and that excites me and motivates me.
How fast did that come together with the Matt Mitrione fight? I mean, it was, he beats Carl Sumanutafa, then you get in the ring and make the challenge. Was it essentially that night that this was all put together? Because, as you mentioned, that was 3 weeks you two had to get ready for that fight.
Yeah. Well, basically, we had spoken over a Bellator contract in general, not a fight contract, not a specific fight contract, just a Bellator contract. And that was something we were organising. And then I don't know how long before, literally like in the days before the event in St. Louis where he fought Carl, I got the call saying, we're flying you out to St. Louis. I was like, oh, okay, we're going to do your medicals and get it all done. And there's a possibility, depending on how the fight pans out, that we could get you and Mitrione out in London in a couple of weeks if you're down for it. Being who I am, and also being that I've been on the sidelines waiting for this opportunity, I'm the sort of guy that generally says yes. And I went out there and we did my medicals. So my medicals were all done in the build up before the show. Sat ringside at the show and watched it. And literally, we were just winging it. And Richard just said, just after the Mitrione fight, if he manages to get the win, just keep, or even if he doesn't get the win or whatever, or just keep an eye on me, and we'll just think on the spot. And if I call you in, just come in. And that was literally all I knew. Obviously it was a fight that had some hills and had some troubles in it, and I wasn't sure if I was going to get called in. So I was like, I don't know if I'm going to fight in London now, but I'll be fighting soon. And then I got waved in, and we made the fight, and then that was it. That was my preparation began there.
Do you have you have fought in the U.S. before. Do you have a preference fighting at home as opposed to going abroad, coming to San Jose for this fight? It's obviously a very big card for Bellator on Spike TV. What are your thoughts about just fighting somewhere different here in San Jose? Yeah,
I mean, I'm generally on a personal level, I'm looking forward to coming to San Jose and checking the place out. It's nice to get around and see different parts of the world, regardless outside of fighting. As far as the fighting goes, I really enjoyed fighting in London. It was great to get to the O2 in London and see my face on the posters and have people come see it. But in reality, Bellator's an American company and the biggest shows, and San Jose is Bellator's hometown. And so I'm really flattered and excited to be coming over there and doing that. As far as just places I fought, I mean, I've really enjoyed fighting in Japan. Fighting in Japan was amazing, a different kind of crowd as well. So I do enjoy getting around.
When you look at the Bellator heavyweight landscape, it seems that it's now got a bit of a vision behind it. I mean, the title was kind of up in the air for a while, but now you have Quinton Jackson fighting at heavyweight. This card will feature Fedor Emelianenko's debut fighting Matt Mitrione. It seems that there's a lot of interesting heavyweights now, yourself being one of them. Do you feel it's as important that you go out and have entertaining fights as well, more so than just a win or a loss being the ultimate factor when Bellator is looking at heavyweights?
Well, I really want to be exciting. I'm not someone that's as known as say a Rampage. Obviously, Kongo's been around for a while, so I'm still sort of building my legacy and building my name. So I need to be exciting. These guys, when they made their reputation, certainly they were exciting fighters too. So I'm looking to be that guy, but I'm also looking to get the win. And I gave a lot of commitment and a lot of excitement to Bellator and to the crowd in London, and really sacrificed myself out there, just threw myself into the fight on short notice. And I'm looking to get people off their seats and enjoying these fights here in San Jose. But I'm also looking to, have a strategy that's going to get me the win and put me in a position to get closer to being one of the guys that can think about fighting for that belt at some point, maybe.
At 37 years of age now, are you preparing for fights any differently than when you first entered the sport? And just, a lot of fighters, they will say that they'll train smarter as they get older. Has that been the case for you? And how is your health overall at this time?
My health's very good. I mean, I don't know how much you know of my background, but my fight career, as far as fighting professionally, began in 2009, and also my training, and sparring, and everything like that also all began in 2009. So I haven't got a massive long history of sparring wars and concussions and all stuff that goes along with it. So in that way, I'm fairly fresh. Obviously, I've been in sports for a long time, so my body it has the pros and cons. It's very developed. It's also got some wear and tear as it does. But my training, due to me sort of still not being new to the sport, but still to me still sort of learning and having time to learn, I still do adapt to my training a lot, and I've still added. There's things I've added to this camp here that I've never added in before. The way I have now that I'm seeing benefits from. So I still see a lot of progression, which is needed to be as motivated as you need to be.
When you're kind of assessing this fight with Cheick Kongo, I mean, this is someone who can have a very frustrating style for a lot of fighters. I mean, tell us a bit about what you have zeroed in on when studying any tape of Cheick Kongo. What kind of fight you envision with Cheick Kongo?
Well, first and foremost, I might as well. I guess it's a good story. Is I've lived with Kongo for a couple of months and trained with him. So
that's right.
We trained together a lot. I mean, I was the full-time paid sparring partner for the Pat Barry fight, and I also worked most of the camp with him for his Sean Jordan fight. We've worked together quite a lot, so we know some stuff about each other.
When was the last time the Sean Jordan fight? That would have been the last time you two sparred together.
That was the last time we trained together and sparred together. And we're cool. There's a lot of mutual respect as people, but we're not great friends. We don't talk all the time, so I haven't spoken with him for a long time. But yeah, the Sean Jordan fight was 2 or 3 years ago now, I guess.
Do you have any prognostication for the main event? And what does it mean getting to fight on the same card as Fedor Emelianenko? Is that a big deal to you? Just one of, if not the greatest heavyweights of all time, being on this card.
Yeah, it's really cool. I'm getting the vibe of how cool it is fighting on the same card as Fedor by sort of reading the articles and being tagged in stuff of it. I'm not someone. I learned what this sport was when I started doing it myself. So I haven't got that sort of massive background of history and of studying who's who and knowing about the legends of the sport before I started and during that time. So I'm quite a newbie fan in the big picture of things. But I have looked at a lot of things he's done, and I respect the tough guy and the success he's had and the winning streak he went on, and it's certainly a pleasure to be getting on to fight on the shows that are that big. But I don't really look at people as from a fan point of view. I'm looking at Fedor, same show as me. Great, let's go out, perform well. I want to fight with these guys.
And is it true? Are you fighting for KSW in a few months? There's that rumor out there, but I didn't know if that was accurate or not.
Yeah, I've had a few people messaging about that rumor. There's nothing to talk about at this second in time. I can tell you that much. And anything I do is based around Bellator's plans. Bellator my priority and my only focus, and I'm exclusive to Bellator. But if there's an exciting opportunity and Scott and Rich and the guys think it's mutually beneficial, then we can talk about it. But at the moment, I haven't got an offer or a contract on the table from anyone anyway.
And final thing, if you had your perfect outlook for 2017, I mean, you mentioned fighting 5 times back in 2015. Is that the kind of number of fights you're hoping to get in this year? Is there kind of a middle ground between, you only got in 1 fight last year? What would be your ideal schedule for 2017?
Yeah, I'd say a minimum. As soon as I'm starting in February, I'm already sort of a month and a half behind. So a minimum 4, maximum 6.
Wow, It's going to be a busy year then for
maybe a one-night tournament. We could tick a few boxes with a one-night tournament. We should have done a one-night tournament in San Jose.
That would have been a great idea there. There's certainly the heavyweight division very much growing in Bellator, and they need a heavyweight champion. So, Oli, I want to thank you so much for this time. Once again, Bellator 172. It's going down next Saturday night, February the 18th. Spike TV. It's Oli Thompson taking on Cheick Kongo, and all the best going into Fight Week, Oli, and we will be watching next weekend.
Thank you, sir.
That was Oli Thompson, Britain's strongest man in 2006, and then flipping over to make a career in mixed martial arts, which he began in 2009. He's been very active in the past 8 years. When you look at the fact that here's a guy that has amassed a record of 17-9 thus far in his career, and that only dates back to 2009, had a 5-fight win streak, all of those fights in 2015, and then that was ended by Matt Mitrione, who headlines Saturday's card. And an interesting trivia note is that back in April of 2014, he lost to a fighter by the name of Gizm Salmani, who today is known as Razor in the WWE. He's part of this tag team called the Authors of Pain in NXT, and they had a fight that lasted all of 18 seconds, which Salmani won for Bama back in 2014. So there's some trivia for you if you are a pro wrestling fan. All right, our next guest is Johny Hendricks, the former welterweight champion of the world, has had a really rough stretch at 170 pounds. After that phenomenal performance against Georges St-Pierre that many people to this day continue to debate, he followed that up by becoming the welterweight champion in 2014, defeating Robbie Lawler, but then lost the title at the end of that year, and in 2015 bounced back with a win over Matt Browne, but then it was weight-cutting issues that really took hold of Johny Hendricks' career. He had to remove himself from the fight with Tyron Woodley back in October of 2015 at UFC 192. He had to be taken to the hospital, couldn't even make it to the weigh-ins, so the fight was called off. Then 2016, he had a very lackluster performance against Stephen Thompson to start off the year in February, followed that one up with a loss to Kelvin Gastelum at UFC 200, and then most recently losing to Neil Magny in what was a close fight. It's 3 losses, and here he is getting set for his middleweight debut on Sunday night in Halifax, Nova Scotia, as he will be taking on Hector Lombard, a guy who competed at middleweight in the past, then cut down to welterweight, and then in his last fight, he returned to middleweight, suffering that loss to Dan Henderson at UFC 199 last June. So we have not seen Lombard since then. He will be in action against our guest. Joining us now, Johny Hendricks.
You were landing some big shots there. You guys were throwing down.
He was a better fighter. I didn't fight. No lie. That was just... Is that the guy who won the belt? Is that the guy that would even be considered a guy who won the belt? No, right now, I got to take a step back. I got to take a step back, talk to the family, talk to the wife, see what's next. That was so pathetic. I'm giving that... no lie. I'm my worst critic. I'd give that a D.
Johny Hendricks is with us. Johny, how are you enjoying Halifax thus far?
You know, I'm enjoying it. It's very nice. I cannot complain. The people are great. You know, Canada has always been great to me. You know, I love snow, so it works out.
Coming off of the Neil Magny fight, was this a situation where you wanted to get back in there as soon as possible? Tell us a bit about the process of how quickly this fight came together for you.
You know what? It came together in like a week and a half, I think, and if that long. And because realistically, I knew I'm not cutting as much weight, so it's not as hard, right? And so I can just go in there, you know, 85. You know, if I can fight 4 times a year, that wouldn't be hard on me. You know, it just depends on the fight, and you know, do I get banged up or whatever. But you know, that's sort of where my head's at is to grow and to do that. So whenever they, you know, before they would say, hey, you have could you take a fight in 4 weeks? I wouldn't be able to unless we had to move it up. You know what I mean? Move up the weight because I cut that much weight. Now that I don't have to worry about that, you know, fights can happen. I can be ready for, like, let's say there's a fight in Dallas, right? And there's some 85 pounders on there. Well, I'll train sort of to try to get ready for that just in case somebody falls out.
Has this week for you, has it been dramatically different than some of your past fights where, for a lot of fighters, they'll say the weight cut suddenly becomes, that's the biggest thing of fight week, and the actual fight almost becomes secondary. Is this a dramatically different experience this week for you?
Yes, 100%. You're right on that. It became all about the fight, not about the weight.
Right. And how are you feeling right now? Are you at a weight where you are, there's no problems ahead of Saturday? I mean, how is your body adjusted to this new weight class that you felt?
It's done very well. I hit 6 over last night. Not really trying. We didn't, we only pushed a little bit, nothing hard, nothing crazy. And we hit 6 over. Tonight we're going to try to hit for 3 over.
So you're well within comfortable distance where you would want to be at this point.
Yes. Realistically, I could be at 200 eating and drinking everything I want. I'm at 196 right now, and I ate breakfast. I drank 3 pounds, maybe 4 pounds so far today. It's just one of those things that, it's a different feeling. You're losing weight in a sense, but it's a comfortable weight loss.
I want to go back to last July after your fight at UFC 200. And I don't know if you remember this interview, but you did a post-fight interview with Megan O'Leary. And I thought it was one of the most honest assessments a fighter has had. I mean, you were very down on yourself that night. I mean, you called your performance pathetic. You gave your grade a D. It was definitely like you were very critical of that performance. What was it that, did you go back and watch that fight? How did you prepare for Neil Magny after that performance where, by your own admission, you were your own biggest critic afterwards?
And that's the thing as well. I'm always going to be.
Yeah.
I don't need people on the internet or news reporters to be my critic. And that's something I've learned through wrestling all my life is, I don't need to hear it from somebody else. I'll tell myself, you sucked. And I really believe that most of it is because, going in the first round, you feel good. By the second round, you're there. By the third round, you're not there. You're trying to get through the match. You know what I mean? Or the last 5 minutes of the fight. That's really what 70 became for me. Even with the Neil Magny, you're sitting there, you're fighting, and you're just going, oh my gosh, I still have 2 more of these. And then you push yourself, but there's only so far you can push yourself before your body just starts crumbling. And, I have a feeling that I'm going to carry that over to 85 though too. If I think I'm getting tired, I'll be like, you're not tired. You know what tired really feels like. And drained. I think that's only going to help me as a fighter as I'm moved up.
Is it important for you? Maybe a better question is, after the year you had in 2016, did you ever enlist in a sports psychologist to maybe deal with, whatever you were going through? Because some fighters, they can really get wrapped up when there is a streak and you're so focused on the win that it kind of just blurs away from this isolated performance. I have to perform at my best. I know I can beat this person, and there's some kind of barrier to get over with. Is that any kind of issues that you have dealt with over the last few fights?
No. Realistically, it was never about my opponent. It was always about, hey, if the weight cut goes good, I'll win. That's
right. Really
where my head was at. It's always been that way. If the weight cut goes good, I'm going to win. But in 2016, the only difference is that we don't have IBs anymore.
Right.
And so, before, you could do I was doing an interview not too long ago. I said, go cut, or you know what? Just go work out. Go work out for 2 hours. Try to blow your muscles out. Do whatever you need to do. Run for 45 minutes hit the weights, whatever you can do, push yourself to the limits, and then go get an IV. And after an IV, you felt like you didn't go to sleep, get an IV, go to home, rest, sleep. The next morning, you're going to wake up going, wow, I feel amazing. After what I just went through, I feel amazing. But I get, and that's where I also say I get what USADA is doing with no IVs. There's a lot of things you can mask, right? There's a lot of ways to cheat a drug system. So I get that aspect of it as well.
When the main event for this card, it was originally going to be Junior Dos Santos in this main event against Stefan Struve. When that fight fell apart, did they ever approach you about this becoming a 5-round fight and becoming the main event, or was this always going to be a 3-round fight?
No. I think it was always going to be a 3-round fight, right? I don't think that they talked to me about a 5-round fight. All I knew is that realistically, it didn't matter if it was a 5 or a 3. I know I can get in shape for a 5-round fight. 3 is a little easier, but it didn't really matter if it was going to be a 5 or a 3 to me.
What are some of the aspects of Hector Lombard's game that you focused on the most for this particular fight? I mean, this is somebody that a difficult opponent at either weight class. I mean, someone that as well has fought at welterweight. Was he on your radar at all when you were still fighting at 170?
Yeah, he was. I thought I was going to have to fight him at 170. Mm-hmm. And he's a guy that's going to be, he's very powerful. He's going to come out. He's going to try to, the best way I can explain, he's going to try to bully you, meaning that he's going to be trying to pressure you, push you, do things to get his game offensive. The only thing is that I'm a bully too when it comes to that, and I used to be, great at it. And this fight is going to show that I can still be that, because, that now that I have the energy to put forth the energy to continue to do that, I have.
Final thing here, Johnny, before we let you go, and thanks so much for this time. Is it at all, I don't want to say amusing, but maybe even frustrating for you that here it is, the week of Johny Hendricks' first fight at 185 pounds, and who is on the verge of returning to the UFC but the guy, Georges St-Pierre? I mean, did you just have to have a laugh at the timing of all of this?
You know what? No, I don't think it has anything to do with that. I just know that he's thinking about 85 too, and I hope that he is. So that way I can go out there, do what I need to do with Hector, and then do a rematch with GSP.
Well, we're looking forward to it. I think that there is no fight that has more interest than this one. It's Johny Hendricks' debut at middleweight, taking on Hector Lombard. It goes down Sunday night in Halifax, 9 Eastern on FS1 in the U.S., TSN up here in Canada. Johnny, all the best going into this weekend. We'll be watching with great interest.
Hey, thank you so much, and you have a wonderful day.
You too. Thank you, Johnny. Thank you to Johny Hendricks for joining us once again. That's going down on Sunday night. The UFC returning to Halifax, Nova Scotia for the first time since October of 2014. That was their very first card in Halifax, where Rory McDonald that night defeated Tarek Saffiedine in the main event, and that arena was full. They were energetic, so I'm expecting a very hot crowd from Halifax on Sunday night. But let us quickly take a look at both cards coming up this weekend. On Saturday night, we've been discussing it, Bellator 172 going down on Spike. And this is certainly a card where it was pointed out to me by my colleague, Cody Saftik, about the age. If you were to average out the ages of some of these fighters on this card, I mean, you've got Fedor Emelianenko at 40, Matt Mitrione, 38, Josh Thompson returning to action at the age of 38, Josh Koscheck, his former teammate at AKA, 39. So, by contrast, Patricky Pitbull, very youthful. And I'm not even including Cheick Kongo and Oli Thompson here. I mean, this is definitely the average age of a main card. This might be on the higher end for any promotion this year. But let us take a look. The main card is going to feature, of course, the return of Fedor Emelianenko, this after a performance against Fabio Maldonado that many thought at least was a draw, if not should have been stopped altogether when they fought last year. With Fedor, he certainly is someone that people still want to see fight, especially in this environment on free television. Matt Mitrione, this is perception and reality. I think for a lot of people, they perceive Fedor as the king of the heavyweights from Pride, and with Matt Mitrione, I think a lot of people still perceive him as the guy that was part of the Ultimate Fighter house, who came in without any pro experience prior to those fights in the house. Well, since that time, both men have made significant changes, and Matt Mitrione has improved gigantic since 2009. His footwork, his power, you've seen it really come together in a lot of his past fights, particularly towards the end of his UFC run against Sean Jordan, Derek Lewis, Gabriel Gonzaga, and then ran into the submission loss to Ben Rothwell. Travis Browne in a fight where I thought Mitrione was performing well, but of course the visual of that eye on Matt Mitrione is the artifact that people associate with that fight. And then coming into Bellator last year, ran into some trouble early against Carl Suman-Utafa, but then returned and stopped him in the first round, and followed that up with the win over Oli Thompson, which was just a couple of weeks later. He took back-to-back fights instantly to start off his Bellator career. So I like Matt Mitrione in this fight. I think that he is just going to be able to control the striking. I just feel that Fedor, there is certainly a diminished level in his skill set at this point. The fact that a light heavyweight, which is what Fabio Maldonado came up to heavyweight and was able to land on Fedor to the degree he did. I mean, Matt Mitrione, I don't think anyone would pick Fabio Maldonado to beat Matt Mitrione, and I think that Mitrione, his striking will be key in this fight, and I expect Matt Mitrione to get the win. Josh Thompson takes on Patricky Pitbull Freite. For Pitbull, we have not seen him in action since that brutal knockout, my knockout of the year, from last June against Michael Chandler. We will see how he bounces back. Josh Thompson gets the win here. He would have to be in line to fight Michael Chandler next for the lightweight title. And then you've got Cheick Kongo taking on Oli Thompson. Vita Ortega against Brooke Mayo in the women's flyweight division. And the main card will open with Josh Koscheck making his long-awaited Bellator debut. He will be taking on Mauricio Alonso. And with Koscheck, I mean, the last time he fought, it was the fifth of his 5 straight losses, that being to Eric Silva, which amazingly was almost 2 years ago. It's been a long time since we have seen Josh Koscheck in action. So we will see if he can find new life in Bellator. Moving over to the UFC card, this is a show that it is going to feature the UFC debut of highly touted prospect Amin Zahabi, the younger brother of Firas Zahabi of the TriStar Gym in Montreal. Zahabi, he's a 6-0 fighter, 29 years of age, all stoppage victories. He'll be taking on Reginaldo Vieira, and it's a fight that I think a lot of people are looking for this to be a showcase for Amin Zahabi, and we're going to see. He has not taken on the most elite of competition because, quite frankly, Canadian mixed martial arts, it's hardly at a high point. It is very difficult to get opponents, to get cards that actually happen. It is not the easiest road for a Canadian mixed martial arts athlete if you're trying to grow in the sport, especially when you have a last name like Zahabi and you know how dangerous this guy is and difficulty in getting opponents. So Reginaldo Vieira, probably the level you would expect for a first time in the UFC. He was part of Tough Brazil Season 4, and we'll see if he can present any problems for Amin Zahabi. Carla Esparza also back on the undercard. The former strawweight champion will take on Randa Marcos. This is her first fight since defeating Juliana Lima, which followed her own lengthy sabbatical. So it's been a long gap in between fights for Esparza, from the Jacek loss in March of 2015 to that Lima win, and now taking on Randa Marcos. I feel that Esparza, she'll have the wrestling edge for sure in this particular fight. I don't know how exciting this fight may be, but I feel that Carla Esparza likely gets her arm raised. And then the prelims are headlined by Nordine Taleb and Santiago Ponzinibbio, which could turn out to be a lot of fun. Ponzinibbio is one of those strikers that I feel has not realized all of his potential yet, and Taleb is coming off that win over Eric Silva that not too many people predicted he would in his last outing. Main card, we'll see Alessandro Ricci against Paul Felder. That should be a fun striking affair. Sarah McMahon takes on late replacement Gina Mazzani, who is a 4-0 fighter and has not fought since May of last year. And prior to that, hadn't fought since she lost trying to get into the Ultimate Fighter house in 2013. I think rightly so. Sarah McMahon should be a big, big favorite in that fight. Sam Sicilia takes on undefeated Canadian prospect Gavin Tucker at 145 pounds. Tucker comes out of Titans MMA, came up through the Extreme Cage Combat Organization. Only 2 fights since 2013, and I think a lot of that you can just rewind to my discussion on Canadian mixed martial arts. I mean, it's really tough for Canadians to get fights before they get signed by a major promotion. He's coming off stoppage wins over Bo Harris and Chris Coggins, so I'm looking forward to seeing Gavin Tucker make his UFC debut against Sam Sicilia. Elias Theodorou takes on Cesar Ferreira. Theodorou lost his last fight. It was the first loss of his career against Thiago Santos. That was all the way back in December of 2015. And then followed that up with the decision win over Sam Alvey in Ottawa of last year. So, this to me is a very close fight. Ferreira has shown 10 fights into the UFC thus far. I mean, wins over Olawale Bamboshe, Anthony Smith, and Jack Hermanson last year. Ferreira is a very good middleweight, as is Theodorou. I think Theodorou certainly can rely on his wrestling, and even in defeat, showed a lot of toughness against Thiago Santos. This could be a sleeper fight on the main card. Hector Lombard takes on Johny Hendricks. I mean, with Johny Hendricks, to me, the most concerning thing in the Neil Magny fight was just he was hardly even throwing his strikes. And that to me was, you can rely on wrestling up until a point. And against someone who was a world-class judoka in Hector Lombard, wrestling is going to be a very difficult game plan if that's all you're planning for Johny Hendricks. We know with Hector Lombard, he's someone that has to conserve his energy and not just go all out in the first round, but he has that ability to stop anyone in either 185 or the 170-pound weight division. I have to go with Hector Lombard in this fight. For Johny Hendricks' sake, I hope that we see a revived and a renewed Johny Hendricks at this weight class where the weight cut and that stress is taken away from him. But in this fight, I am picking Hector Lombard. And then the main event, Travis Browne and Derek Lewis. Browne is another fighter that certainly under the microscope on this particular card. 34 years old now, and he really needs a big win after losses to high-caliber talent in Cain Velasquez and then quickly coming back to fight Fabricio Verdum in September of last year. Losses in those fights. His last win was against Matt Mitrione. Certainly, his work with Edmond Tarverdyan. Edmond Tarverdyan is a lightning rod in the sport. When you hear former teammates of Travis Browne talking about his footwork and what's happened, seeing those regressions, you hope that this is the Travis Browne that can get back to what worked so well with him, which you would have to go back to prior to the first loss to Fabricio Verdum, which took place in April of 2014. This guy was just on a roll with victories over the likes of Alistair Overeem and Gabriel Gonzaga. I mean, he was defeating killers. Josh Barnett with those elbows to the side of the head. The razor-sharp striking of Travis Browne, if we see that, I feel he certainly can get the win here. Derek Lewis is somebody that has enormous power, and these two will equal each other out in the reach department, but Lewis can get tired as well. We saw that against Shamil Abdurrahimov, and this is a 5-round fight, and I think that's notable. His last loss was to Sean Jordan in June of 2015. Since then, he's won his last 5. But this is a test against Travis Browne. A big one, in my opinion. Travis Browne, I feel, will be the better conditioned. We've seen him go 25 minutes in the past. So for Travis Browne, I favor him in this fight. I feel that this is going to be the biggest test for Derek Lewis. Bigger than Roy Nelson, bigger than any fight he has had. So looking forward to especially these top 2 fights because they will have big consequences for Johny Hendricks and Travis Browne in particular, where everyone is focused on their performances on Sunday night. So that's going to wrap up the show. I want to thank our guests, Johny Hendricks, Mike Bohn, and Oli Thompson. Next week we will be back. There's no UFC next weekend. Bellator has a card on Friday night as Liam McGeary will be returning to action, so we will chat about that and whatever other news is happening in the world of mixed martial arts. Always lots to discuss and cover. You can follow me on Twitter at I am John Pollock, and of course you can catch the show each and every Thursday at fightnetwork.com, You can subscribe to the MMA Report with John Pollock on iTunes. If you happen to leave a review on iTunes, it's greatly appreciated. And the show goes up at youtube.com/Fight Network. We'll chat with you in 7 days. Thank you for listening. 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 Thank you.